As I said, we had 8 offices. We had a manager in every office, and every office was different. So some of them were really profitable. Some of them were losing money. Some of the managers were great at recruiting. Some of them were great at coaching. And so there was just a whole bunch of different needs in different places. And the truth was that nobody had ever been taught how to recruit, retain, or coach.
You're listening to the Real Estate Sessions podcast, and I'm your host, Bill Risser, Executive Vice President, Strategic Partnerships with Rate My Agent. Rate My Agent is not just for collecting reviews. It's a suite of powerful tools and features designed to help improve your online reputation and visibility while making it easier for new prospects to find you and reach out. For more information, head on over to ratemyagent.com. Listen in as I interview industry leaders and get their stories and journeys to the world of real estate. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 271 of the Real Estate Sessions podcast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for telling your friends. And today we're going to be talking to somebody I met at the T360 Tech Summit, Phillip Gagnon. Phillip is the founder of 3 Data Pulse. What Phillip's company does is works on the 3 pillars that every brokerage needs to be successful. 1, recruiting. 2, retention, and 3, agent productivity. So very cool backstory with Phillip. We're going to get into that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how can you help a broker that's struggling with recruiting or retention. And we'll get some tips and tricks there. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's get this thing going. Phillip, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, it's going to be a lot of fun. You and I, we connected just recently we were in Texas. We were in the Fort Worth area, right? For the T3 Tech Summit.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah. We should get that right because I have a feeling that that'll matter to Travis. So we want to
for sure.
Yeah. Really a great event. And
it was.
I got to see some cool stuff there. Yeah. AI is the buzzword, right? It's all over the place. Everybody's talking about it. But Howard's presentation from Follow Up Boss was pretty impressive with some really deep dive looks in some of the stuff that happens in that world. So I'm sure for you, that's going to be a part of, your world as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I did not get to catch his presentation. I was manning the booth there, but no, the AI is definitely a thing, and people are starting to ask for it now. Is like, what AI stuff are you using? How are you using AI? So it's almost pushing things that direction.
Yeah, I think it's the how you use it, right? It's not just ChatGPT. Sure. It's so much more than that and so deeper than that, and it's just going to be unbelievable in the next few years how fast things kind of start moving in that direction. It's started already. Yeah, good. Well, let's start at the beginning because that's how you listen to the show a little bit. So, I like to go back I want to find out where people came from. I want to get a little bit of their background. You're based in Orlando. I know you went to UCF. Are you a native Floridian? Am I talking to a native?
I am. Yep. I was born just outside of Fort Lauderdale. One of the few. It was certainly one of the few when I was born down there. There's a lot more now than there were then. But right. I was born down in South Florida. Lived there until I was about 12, and then me and my family moved to France, just outside of Paris.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. So let's talk about that for a second. So I've made my first trip to Paris this year. Was there actually for the French Open. So we stayed.
Oh, nice.
We stayed on the west side of Paris. Because that's where the Roland Garros is, but we traveled into the city a lot. So describe to me kind of geographically where you lived in relation to the city first.
Yep. So we were to the west near Versailles. So if you're familiar with the Chateau de Versailles, that's where we were, was like 5 minutes down the road from there.
So first of all, do you speak French fluently?
I do. Yep.
You do? Awesome.
I went to an all French, all boys school in Paris for 2 years.
Wow. So there was no French as a second language class there, I'm just assuming?
Not so much. No. While they were taking English classes, I would go off into the library and take French classes.
Gotcha. Get caught up. So was it one of your parents who had an opportunity there? What guy
so my dad got an offer to go start ERA in Europe, and the first country they went to was France.
Wow, that's great. And this is now things are tying together as some of the research I've done kind of lets me understand where we're going to be headed. So how old were you when you came back over to the States?
16, 17 years old. We were there for like 4 or 5 years.
So you jumped right into high school here.
I did. That was a culture
returning
shock.
From France. Yeah, that had to be very interesting.
That was quite the culture shock for sure.
And it was at Orlando area?
Yep. Yeah, and
Okay.
I've been living
And
here since '98.
and your dad was with ERA for a long time then, it sounds like.
Still is. Yep, he's still the
Still
president of
is.
ERA France and ERA Europe.
We're going to talk more about that in a minute. Let me get your take. You've been in Orlando for a while now. You're still in that neck of the woods. It's known for tourism. I think it's one of the most visited geographical areas in the country every year. It's with all the parks and all the stuff and the weather. Tell me the biggest misconception about Orlando.
Wait, number one is that it's just Disney. Like that's the only thing that's here
Okay.
because that's all people see when they come. So that's probably number one. Number two, I hear a lot of people make comments about how backwards it is, or they think it's backwards, and it's really not. I mean, you get north because Disney's on the south side of town. You get to the north side, and you get away from all the tourism, and it's just like anywhere else in the country.
Yeah. Yeah. Like talk about Lake Mary and start going north up towards the beaches north, Orlando.
Not even that far. I mean, really just north of Orlando itself because Disney's south of it. So like Orlando and north it's just like anywhere else in the country.
I want to give a public service announcement. We're recording this episode late in 2023, and I've lived in St. Petersburg, Florida for 7 years now. And that freeway's finally done. And it is amazing taking I-4 through Orlando because it's been a nightmare forever.
It was. Yeah. And the express lanes are a lot better and the beltway's almost done. That's going to change things too. So exciting times.
Such a change. That's awesome. Yeah. I love that part. So you finished high school there, and I know you stay local for school because I've actually been to the UCF campus. It's really cool. It's really nice on the kind of eastern side of the city. The UCF Knights, I have a quick question for you. I don't know if this is going to be good or bad for you, but like just a few years ago, they went undefeated and were not in the football playoffs. And I think they beat Auburn in the SEC. Are you still bitter about that?
Not so much. I think it just goes to show that no matter what system we come up with, it can always be improved. It can always be better. Definitely should have been in contention, or they should have just given them the championship outright. I mean, they were the only undefeated team that year. We could have just skipped the playoff and just give them the trophy and be done.
Yeah, that was a big deal. There were some parades and events and some stuff. And I've got buddies in the SEC who just couldn't. It was just tearing them up, like what do they think they're doing? Yeah. I love that part of it. All right. So I'm just going to guess then when you're in school at UCF, well, this could go one of two ways. One, you were predestined to kind of work in the real estate space, or two, you were never going to work in the real estate space because that's usually how it happens. So which one did you have?
It was kind of both. Early on, I had thought about going into politics. And so I was going to go to law school after college. I got the opportunity to go work for a congressman up in DC, and that fixed everything for me really quick. So we got out of that. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my first job out of college was actually at a mortgage company. Doing some stuff for them. I got to meet some interesting characters there that I'm sure, talk about in a couple minutes as well. But that was my first job out up until they went out of business was it 2008, 2009, something like that?
Okay. It wasn't with ERA. It wasn't, talking to your dad, or you obviously had an in if you wanted to kind of get right into something. So how does that happen? It wasn't really real estate coming out of school, wasn't kind of maybe what you were thinking about. But it sounds like, with going into mortgage first, it was pretty obvious you were going to go down that path.
Yeah, it was. When the company went out of business in 2008, 2009, whatever year it was, I then came really close to actually moving to Portland to go work for Nike and turned that down and ended up working at ERA Europe.
Okay. And your focus in school, was it on the tech side of things? Was it?
Yeah. Computer science, information technology. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I like that the computer science, information technology side of things, it's not just the coding and all that other stuff that kind of goes with it, but it's how to use that, how to be that liaison, right, between the two fields that are always in everyone's company. It's the leadership and then the tech people. You need that bridge, and that's kind of what you came out of there with, right? Yeah. Awesome.
Pretty much, yeah.
So let's talk about it. You end up, I think I can say this, I think you end up working with or for your dad, because if he's running Europe, ERA, and you end up being the ERA Europe Director of Technology, let's talk about that for a little bit. One, at least you spoke French. You're good to go there.
Yep.
But look, they speak more than just French in Europe. So my first question is, how did all that go?
English is the international business language pretty much around the world. So the folks that I would be dealing with, for the most part, all spoke English. And so that wasn't too much of a challenge. So the headquarters, without getting into too much of a tangent here, ERA Europe is not actually part of Anywhere or Realogy or HFS or any of that other stuff. They actually sold off Europe as what they call a mega master franchise. So we were operating as a franchise that could sell master franchises. So we weren't tied to Anywhere, Realogy, any of that stuff. The headquarters for ERA Europe is in Winter Park, Florida, here in Orlando. So
Wow.
we would commute to Europe. My dad still does. As a matter of fact, he's there right now doing a 3-week tour of France. But I was commuting there probably about once every other month.
Real estate in every other country outside of the United States and Canada is radically different than real estate here. As we go through our own little issues with real estate in the United States,
That's a good
in
description.
Europe, in Europe, Australia, South America, I mean, it's so different everywhere else in the world. First of all, just kind of talk about that little piece of it, right? Just, like give us that quick summary of, like, for an agent listening to you right now would go, oh, wow, they do it that way?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many crazy stories. So, I mean, first off, most countries don't have an MLS. So you got to take that off the table. So that dramatically changes things, number one. Number two, the licensing requirements are so different from one country to the next. Some of them, it's just like a business license. Like you would go to like your city and say, hey, I'm a business, pay your $50. And now you've got a real estate license and that's what you need to operate. Some of them require 4-year degrees. I mean, it's all over the place. And what's so crazy, and I think what's hard maybe for some Americans to understand is the distance that you would go. I mean, let's just say you're somewhere in New England, you could drive 2 hours in any direction. And with the exception of Canada, you're still in the US and it's still basically the same stuff. But in Europe, you're going to go through 3 different countries that all speak different languages, that all have different customs and different histories and ways of doing things and cultures. And it's just all so different within a very, very small geographic space. And then you get all the cultural differences that go into that. And it's crazy. One of the best stories that I heard was comparing the Swiss to the Dutch. So the distance from Switzerland to the Netherlands, I mean, I don't know what it is in miles. It's very short. You can kind of cut through France and Belgium and then you're in the Netherlands. It's right there. The Dutch are big into cooperating with each other and they're very direct, down to business. Like, we're going to do the deal. We're going to get things done. And the Swiss are a little bit more isolationist. And we see this in their politics, obviously. And they're more reserved. We see that in their banking system. So you got all these different things. And where all this comes from is from centuries of agriculture. So the Netherlands, much like Florida, is basically a swamp, right? You've got, dikes and streams and stuff everywhere, levees to keep the country out of the water. But in Switzerland, it's very lush. It's, green pastures. Everybody's got tons of land. So in the Netherlands, if you wanted milk and you didn't have cows or goats, you'd have to barter with somebody to get that. But you had some other product that they needed. So there was a lot of this cooperation with each other. But in Switzerland, you had so much land. You had your own goats. You had your own potatoes. You had your own stuff. You didn't need anybody else. And so that's how business gets done now, is a lot of those same practices that have been going on for thousands of years.
Wow. I'm just trying to think of your role, right? Director of technology. So that meant, and how long ago, what time frame are we talking about here, roughly?
2009-ish to 2016, 17.
Wow. So we're talking fairly recently when a lot of tech is exploding around our country here in the United States.
Yep.
How much of that were you able to pull in, or that worked, or that applied, to that? Was it a much, I don't want to call it simpler, but was there less complexity with the technology in Europe than it feels like there is here in the States? Or do I have that completely backwards? You can be honest.
Well, so, one of the issues is because there's no MLS, there's really no such thing as like buyer's agents.
Right.
So the only way to do anything is to get listings. So that means everything that we had to do was listing focused, seller focused, and most of what goes on in the US is buyer focused.
Right.
So it just meant that, there really wasn't a lot of stuff that we could borrow from the US. We had to come up with stuff that would work in Europe.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. And I work for Rate My Agent. We're a company that was born in Australia, right? Heavy focus on sellers and listings. You
Yeah,
know, I
exactly.
think there's a couple of buyer agents floating around somewhere down there. We can't find them, hard to find them.
Right.
But generally, people show up and they do their own due diligence prior to writing the contract. They do all kinds of stuff. It feels backwards. I'm sure they feel we're backwards. It's just the way it works. But yeah, very interesting. You end up leaving ERA Europe
Mhm.
and you connect up with Robert Palmer.
I do.
Now, for those in Florida, we know Robert Palmer, right? He's
Yep.
big on TV and radio. There was a arena named after him. I've seen him at events like Florida Realtors, annual convention with who was there, Derek Jeter or A
Oh
Rod. I mean,
yeah.
he's
Yeah. Yeah. Did that a
remember
few
those
years
days,
ago.
right?
Yep. I remember that.
Yeah. So, how did you end up connecting with the Robert Palmer? Really, companies, I guess we'll call
Robert Palmer
it.
Company. I laugh because that was actually my idea when I was there. So going back in
Wow.
time, my first job out of school was working for a mortgage company where I was working for Robert, and we were doing direct originations. So that company ends up going out of business. I go to Europe. He ends up starting his own mortgage brokerage, liquidates his 401k, and then becomes a lender, Fannie Freddie seller servicer, which became RP Funding. He had gotten into a spot because he was one of the first people to go direct to consumer with mortgages.
Mm,
And that rubbed a lot of agents the wrong way. And so he had sort of an image problem with agents because agents were starting to talk buyers out of using him and using their preferred lender
right.
because they said, this guy, we don't know him. We can't help you with anything and whatever else they were making up. So he came up with an idea to start a marketing services company to help real estate agents as a way to get back in their good graces. And he had started that before I got there. And then he hired me to come in and run that company. And everything they had been doing up until that point was like one-off custom things for real estate agents. And it was great, but it just wasn't scalable. I mean, you could service
Right.
a maximum of 20 agents, but at that point, with the company, I think was in 15 or 20 states and growing, and you can't do that. You can't do custom stuff for every single agent. It just doesn't work. So we came up with a series of templates and processes and systems, which became Listing Power Tools.
Yeah. What was the name of the company? Because I think I know it was it, did it have the word listing in it?
Yeah, so the
Am I
company
wrong?
was Listing Power Tools. No, it was Listing Power
Yeah,
Tools,
that's
and it was
it.
designed to help realtors with listings. And there was a box, and you did a whole unboxing thing. It became known as the Pizza Box. So
Nice.
yeah, that was that.
Okay. Cool. So you're there for a little while and then it's back to ERA?
Yeah, so I started working for actually an ERA franchise here
Awesome.
locally. So I was
Okay.
running that operation. We had 8 offices, 250 agents, 32 full-time employees.
But ultimately, we're going to get to the good stuff now. This is, I say the good stuff. You founded your own company. It's called 3 Data Pulse. Let's,
Yep.
kind of, first of all, usually when you're going to go take that route, we'll call it a startup. You're going to start your own company. You're going to do these things. You're solving someone's pain point. Let's talk about that piece of it. What were you solving for? I'm just going to throw a wild guess out here. People in real estate.
So yeah, so the
Yeah.
platform now is designed to help brokers, managers, and team leaders recruit, retain, and coach their agents.
Yeah.
And the problem that I had, being in ERA Europe and doing master franchise servicing and all of this stuff, I was sort of on the other side of the table. But now running a franchise, I was on the other side. And I had a very different view of what was going on and realized that a lot of the tools that I had even been pushing for years was not necessarily filling the need. So as I said, we had 8 offices, we had a manager in every office, and every office was different. So some of them were really profitable, some of them were losing money, some of the managers were great at recruiting, some of them were great at coaching. And so there was just a whole bunch of different needs in different places. And the truth was that nobody had ever been taught how to recruit, retain, or coach. It was kind of like, hey, you've been an agent and you're good and people like you. So now you're going to go do this and you'll be great and you're going to love it. It's fun.
Yeah,
it doesn't really work.
The skill sets are so different, right? I mean, that's
very much so.
I'll share a quick story. I'll jump in real quick. It sounds like the title space for me back in the day. I was with Fidelity's family of title companies for 20 years, and the next escrow officer in line, when they needed to find a manager, would become the new manager of the office, and that hardly ever worked, right? Because being a good escrow officer has nothing to do with being a good manager of people. So you can manage paper really well, but people are alive. Yeah. So continue, keep going.
Yeah. So the big gap that I had was I didn't know how to best help my managers. And it became obvious, and I think most brokerages are guilty of this, is that they pour everything into the agents, but never into the staff. And so you're relying on the staff to develop these agents, to get more agents, to attract more agents, but their cups are empty because they're just drained and there's nobody pouring into them. And that was the piece that was missing, was how do we help our people get better? Not because they're doing anything wrong or bad or whatever, but just was it Richard Branson says, you take care of your employees, they'll take care of your customers. Same exact thing. We need to take care of our staff and let them take care of the agents.
Yeah. I'm always intrigued by names. So 3, Data Pulse.
Yep.
What does that mean? Yeah. What does that?
So the 3 is the 3 pillars, recruiting, retaining, and coaching our agents. You do those 3 things consistently and do them well, everything else kind of melts away. I can remember having conversations about market share and cancellation rates on contracts and stuff. And it's like, this is not what we should be focusing on. What we should be focusing on is making our agents more productive, making sure that they know what they're supposed to be doing, how to answer questions, deal with objections, and then things like cancellation rate and market share will figure themselves out.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've talked to a lot of brokers then in your new role here, owning this company. You've got to see, probably, I would imagine you might audit their company a little bit to say, what are they doing that helps keep that recruiting going smart and down the right path, but even more importantly, retaining the people they need to retain. Can you think of a brokerage that you visited, right? And you sat there and you went, wow, you guys you're so close. You're like 95% of the way there. Because I would imagine that would be rare.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have different people and you get into bigger brokerages and then, you've got different people that are all doing those 3 things, but not the same person. But no, there's definitely companies that are great at recruiting. I mean, just unbelievable. And then there's other ones that are kind of sleepers that, we've got one company that we work with that was a 7 million GCI company and they recruited 1.3 million net GCI in 12 months. And it wasn't, I saw their stuff. It was fine. There was nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't like you read these emails and texts and conversations and say, wow, this is revolutionary, earth shattering stuff. It's like, no, it's just, they're having a conversation with people. They're just doing it every day.
Yeah. Is culture a word you use a lot, even though you're a data guy and it's all about, algorithms are there and all this other stuff, but it's culture.
Well, right? The biggest thing that we do is sentiment analysis. So you can look at data points, but what we're really looking to try and find is emotion, because that's what makes people want to change. That's what drives human behavior. So if you think, I can't remember who it was that wrote the book. It's called Switch, and it talks about how people make decisions and how people change and why they change. And it's always emotion driven first and rationalized with logic after the fact.
So this is where I'm just going to guess AI is going to get super critical for your company going down as we continue down this path, right? Trying to really nail, like, sentiment's the kind of thing that AI is going to be really good at analyzing and going out and kind of, at least I'm just going to guess here, at least going in and looking at an operation currently, how they work, and come back and say, here are 6 things or 3 things. If you just made these small changes, this could have this kind of a big effect on the other end. Is that close? It's
really not even that granular. That's very granular. It's really not even that. The biggest challenge, this is crazy to say, but the biggest challenge that I see companies have is they just don't want to talk to people. Ooh. Like, just call your agents, right? Like, let's say you haven't talked to an agent in 45 days. That's 6 weeks. Like, a lot can happen in 6 weeks. What's going on with them? Do you remember their dog's name? Do you remember their kids' names? Not that this is going to necessarily make their business better, but it's just that human connection that people are like, okay, I'm here. Somebody cares. Somebody's paying attention. And that right there is really the key to retention, is keeping agents, is just talking to them. As crazy as that sounds.
Yeah. I mean, think about all the tech that's dropped in front of the typical brokerage owner or franchise owner, all the stuff that they got to work on and take care of. And ultimately, if they just had a system in place that made sure they talked to everybody every 2.5, 3 weeks or whatever it is, things would be much better off.
Absolutely. And it helps everybody. I mean, the agents don't feel like they're, a line item on a P&L anymore. They don't feel like they're a cog in the machine. They feel like they're a person and somebody cares. Number one. Number two, the broker is going to gain such incredible insights, the same way I talk to brokers, and it absolutely drives the direction of our business based on those conversations. So everybody wins.
Yeah. Don't overthink it, huh? That's what you're telling me, Phillip. Just do the right stuff, be consistent, have a system. Yeah, that's great. There are companies out there. We know these new models right? EXP, Real, Fathom, United, these companies that attraction is a big deal. I think that they're moving away from the word recruiting, right? And attraction becomes really important for this model. Talk about those, how you see those working, how, because the latest Mike Del Prete report, I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but it showed 12,500 agents leaving the big boxes, going to the new models. And that was very telling over the last, I think, 12 months. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I did see that. And I think what's most interesting in that graph is how many people left Keller Williams. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like 1,500 people in one quarter left KW. And the next biggest, pardon the expression, the next biggest loser, I think, was Anywhere with like 500. Which is, I mean, that's a huge disproportionate difference. And I think what we are seeing is a little bit of shiny object syndrome. And I think it's a lot of, Keller Williams and honestly, Anywhere, BHHS, and I think Remax are all guilty of this, is forgetting who they were. So when KW started, they were a training company. That was their mission. That's who they were. They had downlines. If you wanted to recruit agents into your team or whatever, they had all of this stuff. And then they said, well, now we're going to be a leads company and we're just going to hand out leads. And then that's when EXP started and said, yeah, remember all this stuff that you guys dropped over here? We're going to pick all that up, repackage it, and it's now EXP. But it was what KW was 10 years before. And then KW says, okay, now we're going to be a technology company, which is just the worst idea because the average agent hates technology. So why you would want to be a technology company to agents does not make sense to me, but what do I know? But that's what I think we're seeing is that model was appealing and people put it down because they thought it wasn't working anymore or whatever, which clearly it did. And everybody's picking that up and running with it.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch that. It'll be something to kind of really pay attention to, I think, over the next couple of years to see how where that kind of ends up and goes, right?
And where they evolve.
Absolutely. There's what's the next thing down the road for those models, which there's always got to be something to improve and to get better and to fight off competitors and all that stuff that they have to do in this world to stay successul. Yeah. We have to talk about the lawsuits a little bit. So I've been putting it off. I mean, this is actually the first episode I brought it up because I think I felt like it was too fresh to go out and talk to a couple of guests right after we learned a little bit. And it's not been very long. It's 5 weeks, 6 weeks. But how do you see the lawsuits kind of, well, first of all, do you think they're going to affect your business at all? Do you have to look at that and go, okay, well, I've got to watch out for these key things because that's kind of important to the conversations I have with people?
So I wasn't in the courtroom, obviously, so I don't know all the evidence that was presented.
Right.
So my comments are going to be somewhat blind, I guess. I would think that brokers and larger companies would want more documentation and proof as to what it was that they were telling their agents. Because then when you do get into a courtroom, now you have proof that says, this is what we said, this is what we told them. And that's a large part of what we do is, you train your agents and here's what we trained them on and here's what we told them. Number one, so you can justify your value to them. But number two, from a CYA standpoint, say, no, I told them not to do that and they did it anyway. And here's the 3 conversations where I told them not to do it and they decided to do it anyway. So I would think companies would want more of that. I would think they would want more proof and they would want more stuff because I don't see, there's already been more lawsuits filed in this same vein, and I expect there'll probably be even more filed in similar veins. So I would think that companies would just want to start documenting everything.
Yeah. You think about it, the latest suits are going after individual brokerages, not franchises, right? And teams, even down to the team level. So yeah, I think it's critical. Yeah. As I said, just document the training in place to not do those things that you can't do. Yeah.
Exactly.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah. So Phillip, for those listening, especially brokers and owners, recruiting, retention, really important. What are the biggest things you can do, or what are the most important things that you do that really focus in and help them with those tools?
Yeah. So the first thing that we do is we pull in as much information from as many different places as possible. So, we'll connect to the MLS. That'll give you production information. We'll go to your accounting platform, which will give you company dollar, agent net, the ratio of their business that's agent generated versus company generated, because it's important to remind agents of that, because sometimes they forget where their business is coming from. But we'll even go, a step further to programs like agent CRMs and see, how many phone calls did they make to get those appointments, to get those, listing appointments, to get the pendings, to get the closings, all that stuff. Relocation platforms, are they updating the leads that you're giving them? That kind of stuff. So this way, as a broker manager, you've got one spot where you can see everything. You're not having to log into 20 different places to try and get the information. Did I forget one? Whatever. So we try and put everything in one spot, number one. Number two, because all of the communication is transparent across the staff, everybody can see what they told the agent. So I can see that this agent met with the marketing department and the marketing department was pushing this thing, whatever it is. How can I tie that into my conversation? So now the agent's not trying to make me happy by doing what I'm telling him to do and make marketing happy by doing what they're telling him to do. It's we're going to make everybody happy because we're going to do all of this stuff together. And how does Relo tie into that? And what does the accounting department need? So it's like one unified conversation as opposed to 15 fire hoses just, shooting at the agent trying to get him to do stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to think highly of your company when it's kind of there's scattershot stuff everywhere. And that makes perfect sense, right? Yeah. As an agent, you're thinking, oh my gosh, they're not even talking to each other. There's no way.
Exactly. How does this tie in with that? And where do I fit? Like, what am I doing here? And so you spend all day doing all of this administrative stuff as opposed to talking to people and getting listing appointments and meeting with buyers and showing properties, the stuff that makes money.
And on top of that, they received 6 calls from other brokerages trying to recruit them. So.
On top of all that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Phillip, this has been great. I've had you way over time. Let me ask you the final same question I've asked every guest. What one piece of advice would you give a new agent just getting started?
I would say one piece of advice is I would number one, maybe two things. So number one, understand that this is not a quote unquote side hustle. Mm-hmm. If that's what you're looking for, then I think a referral company is probably the best way to go, because then you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So if that's what you want, that would be my recommendation. It's going to be cheaper, probably more profitable in the long term. So number one, understanding that this is a career, this is a job, number one. And then number two, having your own goals in mind, very clearly defined. So I want X after 12 months. I want Y after 24 months. I want this after 5 years. And then being very clear with the companies that you interview with, like, how are you going to get me from A to B, from B to C, and C to D? What are your tools and systems and processes? What does your track record look like? Have you done this with other people? And then are you going to be able to help me even beyond that? So like, are you great for newly licensed people, but once I become a top producer, I got to go somewhere else? Or can you help me through the whole life cycle? What does that look like?
Man, that is spoken like a guy who's built a lot of tech stacks. That's awesome. That's a great response. That's very well done. Phillip, someone wants to reach out to you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Email, phone, website, phillip@3datapulse.com. Check out the website. I can give you my phone number as well, my personal cell phone. Call me anytime. Love
nice.
To talk to people,
we'll put it in the notes if you want. It's up to you.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Around,
I mean, it's on the website, so you can find me. All right. I'm not hard to find.
Well, this has been great. I'm really glad we got a chance. I think we hooked up at a bar. It's just the way it always works at those tech summits. It was somewhere down at a bar watching watching
Game 7, I think it was. Yeah.
That's right. And the Rangers end up going on to win the whole thing. So Fort Worth is like the happiest town on earth. Good for them.
Absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. And really just what you're doing sounds super cool, because I don't really know anyone else who's doing that. So that's good on you, and continue the great work, and best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Sessions. Please head over to ratethispodcast.com/RE sessions to leave a review or a rating, and subscribe to the Real Estate Sessions podcast at your favorite podcast listening app.